The recent military action in Mali will likely see Islamist militants disperse into the vast desert tracts of the Sahel and Sahara regions, creating fluid security threats to foreign business operators. But as counter-terrorism efforts continue, there will be a pressing need for political dialogue and diplomacy in order to achieve long-term stability. This emerged at the launch of Risk Map 2013 earlier today. Joining us now to discuss risk in the region is Roddy Barclay, Control Risks West Africa analyst. He is also the author of the report. Thank you so much, Mr. Barclay, for joining us. If one looks at West Africa as a region comparative to, say, other regions in parts of the world where there is conflict, what is the risk factor that we're talking about, considering the kind of resources that we have in economies like, let's say, Nigeria? Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, if you look at the sort of global economic picture, which obviously has been complicated by the sort of deterioration in the Eurozone and equally in the US in recent months, you also see the sort of market opportunities in West Africa have increased substantially over the last few years, and that is forcing many investors to increasingly consider these markets, which were previously viewed as frontier markets, perhaps beyond the risk appetite that they would previously have considered, to begin investing in this region. That said, it does still, and as the Mali situation underlined, represent a high-risk environment, and companies that go there will have to, as a result, adapt and ensure that they apply adequate risk mitigation measures in order to be able to operate effectively.
Now, before I get to the risk mitigation mechanisms, talk about the drivers of risk, particularly in places like Mali and Nigeria. To what extent are they driven by the kind of Islamist-led political movements that often result in violent consequences and terror activities? Is it confined to that, or is it also about the extent to which there's political stability and political partnerships and compacts that can be built by these governments?
Well, in that unique context, it's a combination of both. Islamist ascendancy has certainly been a theme that we've watched over the last few years in that Sahel Sahara belt and indeed in northern Nigeria. I think the key, sort of in terms of the scale of the problem, the key thing to look at though is the weakness of state institutions and the challenges that we face on a political level there that create what could have been a sort of a minor regional militancy threat into a major structural source of instability. And that's where I think the key risk lies for sort of major business disruption in that region.
Now, of course, let's take an economy in a country like Nigeria, you know, a very big, massive country, very chaotic in some instances, but people do continue to do business. And of course, the big issue in Nigeria is the durability of state institutions, and then, of course, the so-called hidden costs, you know, code word for corruption. How do companies operate within that environment? What is the kind of classic advice that you give companies that enter markets such as Nigeria?
Well, Nigeria is certainly probably the country within West Africa that best exemplifies the sort of risk-reward balance in terms of the fact that it, as a sort of a huge market potential and natural resource potential, it's extremely attractive to investors, but with those opportunities that becomes a significant risk. However, I think quite a number of foreign businesses, including African businesses, have demonstrated over the last few years that it is possible to do business effectively in Nigeria, provided that you have adequate systems in place, you have a good understanding of the local environment and how business operates, and you insulate yourself from the most prominent threats, be they security risks or corruption risks or sort of risks from political interference.
Talking about insulating yourself against that risk, what does those measures include? Does it include, for example, having, you know, large security? Does it mean that if the system is about bribing your way through, that you resist and you make it a policy of your government, I mean, of your business, or do you play the game? And how many businesses are actually prepared to insulate themselves from risk that could well take them out of the game if they don't participate in what the dominant culture is, you know, in any given country in that part of the world?
On the security front, I think we see, you know, across Nigeria, for example, a lot of businesses do employ in certain areas of the country where security is seen to be a major challenge. There is a need to lean on more robust security measures in place to reduce the risk of your personnel falling victim to either crime or militant attack. And certainly that is one of the aspects of doing business in Nigeria. But equally, just a general sort of policies in place so that you can respond to incidents and a general sort of security awareness within your staff and consideration of where you are operating and what your sort of vulnerabilities are given the threat environment. That's how businesses are tending to operate. When it comes to the sort of corruption side of things, yes, corruption is a prominent issue in Nigeria, as it is in many West African states.
Many countries across the world, actually.
Many countries across the world, exactly. But companies are increasingly being able to demonstrate that when you do put stringent anti-corruption policies in place, you implement them fully, and you ensure that all of your local staff are trained in how to respond to these types of incidents, you can insulate yourself from some of the risks that you are likely to encounter.
How big a threat is piracy in that part of the world, and what are the kinds of insurance risks that are there, and how do companies protect themselves and make sure that when they are, or their staff become involved, that they are, have adequate measures in place that can shield them from a kind of fallout?
Piracy has been very much an evolving threat in Nigeria over the recent years. Historically, it was very much a militancy-linked issue of militant groups, large militant groups, attacking all infrastructure and personnel, particularly in the Niger Delta region. What we've seen more recently is the emergence of smaller criminal gangs. A 2009 amnesty program for militants has significantly reduced the militant threat within the Niger Delta region over the sort of short to medium term horizon. But what we do see is smaller criminal gangs which are exploiting particularly waters which are less well policed, so even pushing out beyond Nigerian waters to try and stage attacks against tanker vessels and other sort of cargo carrying vessels in that region. So that is still very much a challenge for businesses operating there. And again, it's a case of sort of journey management in terms of working out what security is needed given the threat environment, sort of past precedents, for instance, in that area, and then having crisis management plans in place in the event that something goes wrong.
Now, the whole question of risk and continuing to do business in high-risk areas, of course, is dependent on the extent to which there's opportunities, and one can balance that off with the kind of risks that you're facing, but also the preparedness of a company to engage in real terms with its reality. What is the appetite of investors for West Africa, risk notwithstanding?
We're seeing huge appetite for West Africa. As I said earlier, they are still frontier markets, and certainly there's a lot of institutional building needed in order to provide sort of adequate support to the business development in those areas, and equally a lot of need for infrastructural development too. But nevertheless, there are both market and sort of resource-led opportunities across the region, and we're seeing a real sort of increase in interest across a number of sectors, and indeed with clients coming from all sorts of countries as well.